Good morning and welcome to the fourth Power to Your Business webinar brought to us today by Solarsense. On-site renewable energy generation is helping thousands of UK businesses become more sustainable, reduce costs and achieve long-term energy security. But how do businesses get started or continue on this road to a sustainable future? My name is Dave Harris, and today's fourth webinar is entitled The Future of Clean Energy. And in it, we are going to take a closer look at some of the latest innovations in clean energy and find out what they mean for your business. In particular, we will be hearing about the latest advancements in battery technology, energy management, and smart power usage, and how to expand or update an existing solar installation. In other words, what big game changers are on the horizon, and how will they help businesses reduce costs and increase energy security? We'll also be asking, what are the newest and smartest finance options for businesses looking to invest in on-site renewable technologies, and what the change of government might mean for businesses looking to go down this route. Joining me today, I have a panel of experts to help us answer these questions. Christelle Barnes is UK Country Manager at Solar Edge Technologies, and she's also the Vice Chair of the trade association Solar Energy UK, where she's just been recently re-elected for a second three-year term. Tim Cook is an independent energy consultant working with Solarsense, with more than a decade of experience in the clean energy sector. He works with a wide range of businesses to deliver strategic direction for their ongoing energy needs. Matthew Doughty is an expert in electrical engineering and is Business Development Manager at Tesvolt, a leading manufacturer of energy storage systems for commerce and industry. Stuart Graham has worked in the asset finance sector for 17 years and is a director in Lombard's specialist sectors team, focusing on renewable energy finance. Richard Ryan has worked in the field of energy and the built environment for almost 20 years and is co-founder and commercial director at GridImp. And finally, Stephen Barrett launched Solarsense in 1995 in an effort to provide local homeowners and businesses with a sustainable alternative to fossil fuels. Since then, he has led the business to deliver more than 20,000 solar installations across the UK. Now, we're going to start with Stephen in a second, but before I go to him, a quick reminder that you can join in this webinar by using the Q&A function to submit your own questions, and we have a team behind the scenes who will be answering them live, and we will also try to put as many as possible to our panel at the end of the session. So please get onto that Q&A thing if you've got any questions at all. So Stephen, if I could turn to you as the founder of Solarsense to welcome us all to this webinar and give us a little bit of background.
Hello, yes, welcome everybody. Yes, I founded Solarsense nearly 30 years ago. Then it was just the pioneers really having solar. There was no real feedback, no real payback, sorry. And then we had the feed-in tariff, and then solar became mass-produced, and then it became more cost-effective. In recent years, we've had a huge drop in the price of panels, with a tenth of the cost from the feed-in tariff days. And now I'm fascinated to see what is next. Looking forward to hearing from our expert panels. Batteries, AI, smart metering. What is changing? Thank you very much. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So yeah, exactly. Those are the key questions. What is changing? And I'd like to bring in Christelle Barnes, first of all. Perhaps Christelle, with your vice chair hat on for Solar Energy UK, you could give us an overview of the changing landscape. What are the big innovations that are coming down the line?
Of course. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so it's been 14 years, just over 14 years since the feed-in tariff was introduced properly in the UK, or the Clean Energy Cashback Scheme as it was originally known. And lots changed in that time. So for the early adopters of solar, the people who installed in 2010 and even before, it was very much an environmental decision. So people who installed solar did so because, for the most part, they really passionately cared about the environment and wanted to be at the forefront of that transition. Then through the introduction of the feed-in tariff, we saw that the adoption of solar became a very financially driven decision. So for a lot of homeowners in particular, they could get a better return on investment than they could from their ISA. That was the reality in a lot of cases. through the last few years, even up to 8 years, we've moved to an incentive-free industry. So no longer is it driven first and foremost by the financial side. Now we see that the adoption of solar is a combination of factors. It's because people's homes are electrifying. We're using more energy than we did before. So we're looking at how we can offset that. It's because electricity prices have increased, and there's been increased concerns over the last few years around energy stability. It's because of the advancement of the technologies that we have available with solar now. And actually, when we talk about solar and a lot of applications, even for example, the recent manifestos relating to the election, the two words that always came together were solar and storage. So we were talking heavily about the solar and storage targets that we would like the new government to introduce. Electric vehicles, another one. Personally, I drive an electric vehicle. I know a lot of people do now, and a lot of thinking about doing it in the coming years. So we're also thinking, well, how can I offset the energy use of my electric car through my solar panels? So there's a very different buying profile of solar today, and that's just in the residential space. When we move into commercial, we also see a requirement for energy management. We see a requirement for business stability, and still a lot of the same factors that apply in residential exist as well. So we're looking at how we can make solar power work for us 24 hours a day. And we can do that through clever energy management. We can do that through storage. So there's really been quite significant changes in the last few years, and a typical solar installation now does look very different to what it did, say, 5 years ago. We're typically now maybe combined with EV charging, it may be combined with storage, and some form at least of energy management.
And could I get you to just expand a little bit on that storage aspect? Because obviously that's something we're focusing on today. Is it that the storage solutions have improved? And obviously I'll get our other experts to comment on this as well. But is that the reason storage and energy management is now becoming such a big thing?
I think so. Yes, I think it's absolutely fair to say that there's been big advancements in technology. I've been working in the solar industry for the best part of 15 years. And the first introduction to storage that I personally had was in an off-grid application, homes that had no connection to the main electricity grid, and they used lead acid batteries to store their electricity. And this would take up a whole garage. So if you picture the battery inside your car, the 12-volt battery that powers the starter motor, imagine 20, 30 of those across the floor of your garage. That was what solar and storage used to look like 15 years ago. Now we see sleek white boxes that can be installed on the outside of property that take up a very small amount of area, different technology of the batteries, which makes the batteries themselves safer, which makes them smarter, more efficient. So yes, there's been significant advancements in the technology, the efficiency, and also the way we can use those batteries now as well, with the energy management and the software that comes with that. Being able to tell the battery to charge and discharge at certain times of the day, introduce a little bit of AI to make smart decisions on behalf of the customer. So yes, I think for the most part, it's been driven by technology changes, but those technology changes have also driven pricing changes. And as the price of storage reduces, that makes it more accessible to a wider customer base.
And Christelle, could I quickly get you to put your other hat on now as the country manager for Solar Edge, and just tell us about Solar Edge technology? What is it?
Of course. So Solar Edge was founded in 2006. So we've been around almost 20 years. And first and foremost, we're an inverter manufacturer. So we developed a solution that just did things a little bit differently, and ultimately trying to make the generation and usage of electricity smarter. We've expanded our portfolio in the way in which we manage electricity and manage energy in a home significantly over that time. And we now sort of view ourselves more as an energy management provider. So we're bringing solutions to customers that give them more control over the energy usage through the generation, storing, and the way in which they use their electricity. So no longer would I necessarily describe ourselves as a manufacturer of inverters. We're a solution provider for energy management now.
Okay. Thanks, Christelle. Tim, could I turn to you now and ask you whether, in your work, for example, with Solarsense, have you used solar edge technologies and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always a time and a place for Solar Edge. And I think one of the main, as Christel was just saying, it used to focus on the inverter side. And what Solar Edge do so wonderfully differently is that in the standard string inverter, we connect a number of panels in parallel, which means that if one of those panels is affected by shade, whether that be from a tree, a chimney, or a bird mess on the roof of your factory, it would make all of those panels that are connected in that series circuit underperform. And the joy of Solar Edge is that it means that each panel operates, or each two panels operate independently, which is not only great for ensuring that if you've got a panel mismatch or shading, that the system generates to its maximum potential, but also can identify those panels that you may have an issue with, that may need to be looked at because there's an issue with them under warranty situation. But what is so brilliant with Solar Edge is that the monitoring portal is got that extra level of detail. It gives a customer, they can, as Christelle was saying, you can look at not only what the system is generating, but also what you're using on site and what you might be exporting to the grid. So you get a whole picture as to what is the solar contributing to your on-site demand, and importantly, when. And one of the clients that we've worked with, it happens several times, but this one made quite a change because they noticed that instead of using power at the evening and night time, they should actually change their shift to be working at the weekends and then utilising that solar power. And that particularly during the sort of 6 months or so of the alleged UK summer period means that you've got that extra generation, which means that they're not buying electricity at the expensive time. And importantly, they weren't exporting it when they weren't using it and then having to buy it back in. Because, of course, when you export electricity, you're not paid the same rate as you are when you import it. So it's quite important to try and, or it's very useful for clients to have that visibility. So yes, excellent product, but we do use normal string inverters as well, and I would always look for both options with a client, but it certainly has that extra functionality. And now with the option of putting some storage in with that as well, as Christelle said, it can become quite a nice solution under one umbrella.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for reminding us what a terrible summer we're having as well. That's interestingly though, I mean, I wanted to ask you about innovations in the designs of the panels and efficiency and that sort of thing, which I suppose is a factor. If the sun isn't shining all the time, if we're having lots of cloudy days, does efficiency become more of an issue, and is that improving?
Yeah, I guess there's two things there, isn't there? So we often get asked this question. The reality is that panels are always improving. And I've been in it, as you said, over 10, 15 years now. And back in the day, we were talking about 200-watt panels, and we're now talking about, well, up to 500, 600-watt panels if you go for larger panels. But the efficiencies have increased substantially. However, in the last few years, back to the feed-in tariff days, the standard panel was probably 225, 250 watts was a typical panel. And now the typical panel is that kind of 450 kind of watt, is the same sort of size area. So there is a big improvement that has happened over that 10 years. In the last couple of years, there's sort of incremental improvements. It's nothing in the last year that has suddenly been groundbreaking to, mean that you should throw out all your old panels and buy new ones immediately. But it's gradually just improving. But what we have noticed is clients that have installed 10 years ago or more and were those early adopters that are now beginning to think, well, could I expand my system? Could I replace some of my underperforming panels and put some newer panels in? And we're doing a project at the moment where we're swapping a 1 megawatt system for almost 2.5 megawatts. So it suddenly means that you can actually grow quite a lot more power, which is really useful for a lot of clients that have kind of proven that it works and now want to maximize what they can do with it.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, sort of replacing or older panels with newer panels and that sort of thing. I think this is Greg from Bristol has actually asked a question about the recycling the old panels and the obsolete panels. I mean, is that something that is relatively easy to do?
It is, yeah. They all sign up for a recycling scheme, but panels last 50 to 70 years, and what we're mainly doing is reusing them. So we're now looking at some charities right now, actually, where we're taking off some panels, and we found a number of charities will use them that they've had 10 years, but they've got 20, 30 years, we know, of full-time life. There's no
Right.
moving parts. The panels don't really fail.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Well, I hope that
And,
answers.
and on this, I'm just sorry, on the same vein, Dave, I was just going to mention a bit about warranties, as Steve just said. So we typically had around a 10, 12-year warranty 10 years ago or so on solar panels, and a 25-year what we call power output warranty. That has improved over the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, where typical panels now are 15 or 20-year product warranty with a 30-year power output. So, you know, these really are, and that's the warranty, and they're suggesting even after 30 years, they'll still be 85% as efficient as the day they were installed. So these are long-lasting assets. I guess that's the thing.
Okay, great. All right. Well, look, it's let's move on now to Matthew Doughty, because we really want to talk more about the whole issue of storage, batteries, that sort of thing. And Matthew, I know you're an expert on this area, and you've got some graphical things to show us as well. So can you start with the basics of why storage helps and how businesses can use it to save money?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'd just like to highlight the four principal applications or business case or reason why you want to use battery in the UK. So, as everyone has lots of business now have solar installations. We call that self-consumption optimization. There's a time of use business case, which probably a lot of people are quite familiar with the residential market, and that's essentially where you're charging a cheaper tariff and then discharging the battery during the higher tariff period, typically between, say, 4 and 7. We're seeing demand as well where there's lack of grid capacity. So, say a factory wants to expand with additional machinery, etc., they can upgrade their capacity of supply in terms of kilowatts of power, and so you can use a battery to offer that additional power output, additionally backup power as well. But the main one, which is why the industry started storage, is the self-consumption optimization. So obviously, as people install solar, as mentioned, it's been ongoing since 2010. People are looking at their bills and seeing they're actually exporting energy. So let me just show a graph with you, just to try and explain this in a bit more detail. So what we can see here, these are three types of businesses that have installed solar. And what we can see is we've got the electricity drawn from the grid in the red here. So you've got demand, during the early hours into the morning. And then you can see the solar generation here, the peak in the daytime. And then the actual consumption is less than the generation. And therefore the yellow portion here of energy that's been generated, electricity being generated, is exported to the grid and not actually consumed on site. So this is an example of a logistics company, a warehouse, etc. A similar kind of thing for a hotel, not quite as predominant, marked the difference there between generation and demand. And then a typical dairy farming where you've got milking in the morning and milking in the afternoon, but again, outside the peak generation time. So once, as Tim mentioned, businesses can look to, modify their operational time of operations to suit this peak generation of the solar, or again, install a battery, and therefore that excess would be used to charge the battery. So here, that PV curve there, the excess would therefore be used to charge the battery, and then during the evening periods in the night time, the battery will discharge and maintain the loads. So that's those are the principal business cases for a battery so far.
Tim, if I could just bring you in quickly as well. Are you finding that your clients are sort of are they asking for more about battery storage, asking for battery storage and that sort of thing? Is that becoming a factor for you?
Yes, they are. I think nearly everybody will ask the question. And I would just say, though, it isn't necessarily always the right thing for every client. So we do have a commercial client that was a manufacturing plant, for instance, that has a high energy use during the day. We may be in the situation that we maximize their roof and still are only just meeting, or only at certain times just oversupplying their normal demand because they have such a high demand. So it isn't just as simple as saying every scenario is you should put solar, you must have battery storage. That's definitely not what we're saying, but we are saying that there's always a point to look at it. And that's where, obviously, working with the likes of an energy consultant, Solarsense and Tesvolt, etc., we analyse that and we can say to you, well, actually, you're going to use 95% of the power you generate on site automatically without a battery. There really isn't worth the capital expense of installing one to try and save that little 5% of power. However, if, as those illustrations were showing, the split is more 50-50 or even 60-40, then there certainly is an argument that we need to look at. But what is important is that you size the battery correctly. And this is something that we come across time and time again when we put in a proposal to a client, is that one size doesn't fit all, and you can't compare our quote or one quote with a battery and another with a battery unless you understand the capacity and the size of that battery, because it's the amount of kilowatt hours of storage that is so critical and is what affects the price so greatly. So I would just urge anybody that is considering it, just look at it in a little bit more depth and ask those kind of questions as to how much storage am I actually getting?
Yeah. And Matthew, Tim sort of started to answer my next question that I was going to put to you, which is, are batteries suitable for all businesses? And I think Tim has kind of alluded to that there, but could I get you to expand on that? You know, when it's a good idea and when perhaps it isn't?
Yeah, I think Tim made a fair point there, to be honest. And so if you're just looking at self-consumption on its own, maximising the use of that solar energy, then that's a fair point. If the solar generation is always less than the actual demand, then yeah, there wouldn't be a business case in that sense. But as the industry's progressed, there's more to it than just looking to optimize solar usage. There's also the possibility now, as mentioned, with advance on the EMS side, to deliver multi-use. So basically, where you revenue or adding up together the different savings or revenue options. So you've got, say, savings from self-consumption, savings from time of use tariffs, but then moving forwards again, flexibility or being able to create energy trade, essentially, behind the retail businesses go to trade energy in local markets and even national markets as well moving forward. So there's a bit more to it, but Tim's absolutely right that it's not a case of the typical residential offering where it's more or less kind of, put 10 kilowatt hours or whatever, 7 kilowatt hours into a residential property, and that's pretty much about where you want to be. Obviously, with some large properties, it's not quite, it's possibly different, maybe on a mansion or something, but certainly in the commercial and industrial sense, then it really does require a specialist such as Solarsense to evaluate, the size of battery. Obviously, we're talking about significant capital expenditure, so it's not in anyone's interest to just make a guess as to how much capacity is needed. It needs a careful study based on the actual half-hourly data that the installation has, and future perhaps changes to loads of consumption for the business as well.
Dave, I don't know whether one other point just to mention there, and that is just to do with grid constraint issues as well. So something that Tesvolt have brought out is sort of a DC coupled solution. And that can really help if you want to install a bigger solar system than the grid capacity will allow. I don't know whether you want to elaborate on that any further, Matt.
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, so basically there are two ways to connect the battery, if you like. So if we go back to the example of solar panels, they're obviously generating in DC, so direct current, and then the inverters change it to AC. AC is what your business actually is using. That's the national grid. It's distributing AC power. So there are two options then. So you've got your solar inverter is generating AC power, which feeds into your factory, etc., your business. And then on the battery side, there are two ways to do it. So you can have a separate battery inverter, which is taking the excess AC power, converting it to DC, storing the battery, and then as it's discharging, it's going back away from DC to AC and then connecting. So that's an AC coupled system, or some people call it retrofit. What Tim's just mentioned here, we call it DC coupling or hybrid inverter. So essentially that's one box, one inverter, which has the input from the solar panels, but also the input from the battery as well. So there's a benefit at the moment for grid constraints because the DNOs are more commonly specifying that the battery must be DC coupled because at the moment the DNOs see a battery as additional generation. So there's looking at the way you've got 50 kilowatts of PV power, you've got 50 kilowatt battery inverter, therefore you've got 100 kilowatts that's going to potentially export to the grid. Therefore, we don't want you to connect the battery in that way. Whilst no one wants to actually achieve that, no one's targets to export the full power and wants to obviously consume it on site. But at the moment, that's the way they're looking at it. And so if we use the hybrid inverter against just one inverter, one 50 kilowatt AC power inverter, which connects your PV and a large battery or whatever battery is required on the DC side. There are pros and cons to each. There are certainly less losses, so a bit higher efficiency for the DC coupled version. But if you want to, it depends on the site. Obviously, in the residential market, the hybrid inverter is the most commonplace, and it makes sense for space as well. But for some sites, the AC coupled systems, but more for large systems, what does still make sense as a valid option. So it's good to have the two options. That depends on the site. So the overall summary is it's product specific, and every business is different, whether it's AC coupled, DC coupled, and for the actual side of the battery. But the only other thing I'd like to add is that when you're evaluating the battery, it's good to dig deep into the efficiency of the system, the safety features, quality, and the warranty term as well. Whilst it's generally a blanket 10-year performance warranty, you need to look into the details of how many is there a limitation on cycles per day, and if you really want to dive into it, look at it on a levelized custom storage basis. And then, like in Germany, I think we're going to see a big change coming through. I think Richard can elaborate more on this one, but we're going to see market-wide half-hourly settlement. So we're going to, as we move forward in the UK, we're going to see dynamic tariffs. So we've got a system now of time of use, which is a night and a day tariff. But as we move forward, we're going to see more and more businesses exposed to essentially 48, potentially up to 48 pricing points throughout the day. That's already occurred in Poland, actually. So they have on the wholesale market, it's one price every hour, and that's already passed through to residential consumers. And so people have to really become aware of when they use energy and the cost of it. That as in the wholesale market, it really affects the cost that businesses pay. So there's risk and opportunity. Obviously, in the wholesale market, we're negative prices as well. And as we're an island nation, the volatility, the price between the high and the low in the wholesale market will continue. So there's definitely it's a driving factor, we believe, for the demand for storage.
Thank you, Matthew. That's great. Tim, before I move on to Richard, I just want one more question for you, Tim. You mentioned, we talked there about the suitability for businesses, and you said, and Matthew confirmed that it's not always suitable, but you have to look at a lot of quite complex factors. And one thing I don't think we've mentioned is price, because obviously, am I right in thinking that the costs of batteries has dropped, and because presumably that is a factor when you're making the decision, because it's the amount of the investment you got to put in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think it is fair to say that they have dropped substantially over the last 5 years, even. So it does mean that with the increase in energy costs, and therefore the higher importance, I guess, put on self-consumption, that in more cases the battery becomes a viable option to consider, just not in all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tim. That's great. So I'd like to move on to Richard Ryan now, who's just to remind you, is the co-founder and commercial director at GridImp. Richard, thank you for joining us, and sorry we've kept you waiting a while. But I want to talk to you about the sort of smart control, because obviously that's your area of expertise. It's what GridImp does. Tell us what that is and why it matters.
Thanks, Dave. Really, smart control is essential to deal with this new situation, this energy transition from a consumer point of view. And to explain why it's important, if we think about last year in GB, over 40% of the energy that was consumed was generated renewably. But as we all know, renewable generation is intermittent. It changes with the wind. As the wind blows and as the sun shines, it changes. And this affects cost, this availability. And normally consumers buy their energy through energy suppliers. And energy suppliers pass those costs on to the consumers. But most importantly, they pass on the risk. And the risk is all around: when is cheap energy available, cheap renewable energy? When is it not? And when do you have to infill using fossil gas? So these sorts of things that happen in the background, as well as getting enough energy across the existing networks to where they're needed. So as people adopt EVs, like Christelle, or they adopt renewable heating solutions, like lots of us are. You need to get the electrical power to those points where it's needed, and there's a cost to getting that across the networks. And if everybody wants it at the same time, it can be quite a challenge. So what consumers need to recognize is that there is a cost to this transition, and right now the energy companies will wrap that cost up and they will pass it on to you. And I'm glad that Matthew brought up market-wide half-hourly settlement for 2026 for GB. It doesn't sound that sexy as a topic, but it is going to be hugely impactful for people. So this is a mechanism for energy suppliers to more easily pass on this cost, this risk to people. But there's a lot of good news. And you asked me about intelligent automated control, which is what we specialize in here at GridImp. And I would, of course, say this is the number one tool for mitigating this cost risk. But simply what it's all about is nobody has got time to make day-to-day control optimizations. Just because it isn't as sunny today as you expect, and your PV panels aren't going to produce as much as you would expect them to do on the 10th of July, you're not going to change your consumption habits because you're busy. Everybody's busy. So how do you deal with that? So you need help. You need an agent to help make those decisions that you would make if you could make them. So should you delay your EV charging? Is there a little bit of flexibility in when you run your air conditioning or when you run your heating? Or is today the same as yesterday, and will it be the same as tomorrow? And if you can do that, if you can make these small changes to your consumption habits, they make a big impact on your energy costs. And as Matthew mentioned earlier on, a lot of people are maybe on a day-night tariff, and if you are on a day-night tariff or a single rate for all your energy usage, all of those costs, everything that's bundled up in these transitions, every scheme that's been funded, including the feed-in tariff, the cost of all of those is funded through your energy cost, right? So what I'm saying, the message we're trying to get across is that you need to be able to cope with weather changes, cost changes that sit behind these. And if you can adapt to these, there's huge benefits. So what we do is we use intelligent control to forecast what generation you've got on site. If you've got CV, if you've got solar or any other generation, we forecast what your demand is likely to be. We look at forecast price changes. So where you are in the network, is there an opportunity to get paid to reduce your demand, to reduce strain on the grid? We look at the carbon intensity in real time for the energy you're importing from the grid and also what you're generating on site. And that way, our technology creates a plan throughout the day for you to optimize your energy usage. And optimization is going to become more important than energy efficiency, because energy can be cheap, really cheap to use, especially renewable energy, if you use it at the right time. So the most important thing is going to be controlling when you use your energy. So clients who've been working with us, Gridden was founded by myself and Ed Ross in 2018, and we have some early adopters who came on board in the first year. So we've seen with those early adopters, local manufacturers near us here in Somerset, their energy costs have reduced by 50%, despite their demand increasing by 50% as they electrify away from diesel. Huge carbon savings in excess of 100 tons per year. And we've seen other clients who are getting paid a third of their energy cost back through flexibility payments. So this is where they can modulate their demand to take the strain off the grid. And not only are they getting paid for that, what they're actually doing is they're facilitating more new connections for the likes of new solar installations or battery storage or EV chargers. So I think that wrapping this up into something that's comprehensible is to say, look, if you've got solar already and you export back to the grid, you are likely getting a very poor price for exporting your energy back to the grid. And it's a lot less than what you have to pay to import energy from the grid. So I think that's something that most people, even if you've got a legacy feed-in tariff, you'll see the pain when you get 2 line items on the bill and you see that there. So that tells you there's an opportunity, that tells you that there's an opportunity to not only save money, but to use more of your own zero carbon energy. So in terms of business resilience, there is nothing better than getting in control of your energy. There's nothing better than investing in your own generation. There's nothing better than investing in your own storage, if they're sized correctly, of course. Because what it does is, not only does it put you in control of your own energy decarbonization journey, what it does is it gives you the ultimate business resilience against the price risk of market price increases. So when we have another energy crisis, when fossil fuel supplies are constrained deliberately to push up prices, you're resilient because you're less reliant on the grid. But the important thing is, when you're in control and you can move your energy usage around flexibly, you can make money and you can save money. And while you do this, you're helping the grid out. So you're helping other people to get new connections. You're increasing the capacity of zero carbon energy that can flow. So it's very much a virtuous cycle. But so I think the reality is the mechanisms are in place. The metering is in place, the half-hourly metering and smart metering that everybody has. Those mechanisms are in place, and legislative mechanisms are in place for those price risks that the energy suppliers are enduring at the minute to be pushed onto consumers, and they are going to push it on to you. So I think the only mitigation to that is to sort of further, if you've already done it, further embrace your decarbonization journey by investing in the right equipment for yourself. Also invest in linking up your existing common plan, like your heating, your air conditioning, your EV charge points, anything like that. That can be optimized as well. So yeah.
Sorry, Richard, I was just going to say thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer, and I wanted to ask Christelle as well, Christelle, because I think you have I think you alluded to it early about developing energy management and energy management product as well. So could you very quickly tell us about that?
Of course, I was just typing an answer in the Q&A of a similar nature at the moment. So in the case of SolarEdge, we have a product called SolarEdge One and SolarEdge One for C&I. So these are, in the case of the residential solution and energy optimization product, it's software that's designed to offer more control to system owners through different aspects. So it includes the use of profiles to control battery storage. So it could be that you want to set a profile to say charge and discharge at this time. It could be that there's a negative electricity rate and actually want to stop generating for a point in time and import from the grid instead. It could be that you want to use a dynamic tariff control or integrate with some alternative products on the site. In the case of SolarEdge One for C&I, this is about integrating energy management and fleet management and battery storage together with the solar. So in the case of SolarEdge, we acquired 2 companies recently, one who does energy management, a business called Hark, and one who does EV fleet management. It's a business called Wevo. And so by integrating their software solutions together with our existing monitoring platform, which provides a very detailed visibility and control for system owners in both residential and commercial, it's giving us the ability to deliver a very advanced energy management solution for our customers. The needs of residential and commercial we see today are slightly different. So a typical residential customer may want to optimize a dynamic tariff. For example, a typical commercial customer may want to have more control over the energy management within their building and see different devices and perhaps integrate battery storage to offset peak electricity charges at different times of the day. So there may be slightly different use cases in both spaces, but having an energy management solution is, we certainly feel, critical to meeting our customers' needs in 2024 and beyond.
Right. Well, that's so interesting, and thank you, Anne and Richard, for talking to us about that. And I want to now turn to Stuart Graham. And as I said at the beginning, Stuart is director in Lombard's specialist sectors team. And Stuart, clearly, there's a lot of new technology coming along, which arguably is strengthening the business case for clean energy. But you've still got to finance it, and I'm wondering whether you're seeing a growing demand for financing of these sorts of solutions.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. So we've seen a 80% increase in lending volumes within Lombard from 2022 to 2023, specifically in that renewable energy category. So there's definitely been that uptick in inquiries and people moving through to kind of actually taking place the funding, and that was predominantly driven by the huge spikes in energy costs. I think Christelle referred to it before. We obviously saw huge increases. I remember speaking to customers at the time whose energy had gone up kind of 5-fold. So kind of annual cost of £500,000 up to around about 2.5 million, which is a real kind of business risk. And it put energy right at the top of kind of the priority list for a lot of MDs and FDs around the country. And I think when they started to look into the possibility of on-site renewable energy generation, probably surprised at where the costs had gone for things like solar panels. Again, it's been referred to earlier on, seen huge reductions. I think the stat that I always throw out there was, I think 90% reductions over the past 10 years in terms of the actual panels themselves. So you've got declining kind of technology costs, you've got the improving efficiencies, and then you had these huge spikes. So there was just a kind of an avalanche of demand, if you like. It did actually coincide with me starting in the new role, and I keep telling my boss that I was somewhat responsible for that 80% increase, but he's not having it, unfortunately. I think I think a lot of these kind of foundations were laid earlier on. So yeah, huge demand uptick, and I would say, if I'm honest, that kind of trend has probably plateaued at the moment this year. Maybe, obviously, well, not maybe, a lot to do with kind of energy price drops, and kind of that priority maybe dropping off, kind of top 1, top 2, down to maybe, maybe 4 or 5. But there's definitely still kind of rationale for purchase when you look into it, and you wrap yourself around with experts and good people that know what they're talking about.
And Stuart, are you conscious that the types of projects are evolving over time? I mean, we've been talking about batteries, for example. and control systems. I mean, are you getting are more of the projects that you're financing in, installing batteries and control systems, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we've within Lombard we've got a very kind of well-defined credit policy. So it's been around for probably 10, 15 years, and currently we've got around about 12 named technologies on that policy. And that varies from solar through to battery, through to hydro, LED lighting, for example. So there's all sorts of technologies on there, and it does evolve. It evolves with customer demand. It evolves our terms, and where we can push funding options to evolves as well as the technologies evolve. We mentioned previously about extended warranties. There's very well-known manufacturers in the industry now that we kind of hang our hat on in terms of those assets do what they say they do and they last as long as they say they last. So yeah, from that perspective, we can dip into that policy and we can fund all sorts of different asset categories. I think the main thing we've seen is kind of the interplay between the different technologies. So you might have a business, for example, that's looking to decarbonise fleet. They might be looking to hook into a salary sacrifice scheme. EV uptake might increase, and therefore, we can fund the charging infrastructure. But the conversation then kind of progresses onto, okay, what about the extra load in terms of the increase in energy demand? Do we need solar panels? Does that need to be complemented by battery? And we're seeing a lot more interplay between the different assets, and we can now fund everything that's going on in terms of that one project and that transition.
And finally, what about the sort of funding models? I wonder if you could briefly give us an overview of that. So in other words, what are the funding models, and what are the sort of payback periods that businesses can expect?
So the funding is fairly straightforward, to be honest with you. I mean, there's multiple options that, for funding these types of projects. If you look at kind of wider bank facilities, for example, such as overdraft, bank loans, revolving credit facilities, obviously cash. But I might be somewhat biased. I think asset finance via a lease purchase facility or a hire purchase facility makes complete sense on so many levels. It's a very standard piece of documentation. We only take security in the assets, so very, very straightforward. Minimal fees if you compare it to things like bank loans, where you might well be asked to pledge security, for example. There might well be valuation fees, additional external legal fees. We think the Lombard product and in general the asset finance product is absolutely fundamental to businesses looking to transition. I've heard my managing director talk about it as the kind of second coming as asset finance, and I strongly believe it is. It's a facilitator. It helps people transition quicker than perhaps they were looking to do if they were just utilising cash reserves, for example. So yeah, the funding option from an asset finance perspective is very straightforward. And in terms of the paybacks, I'll probably revert back to previous answers. I mean, every business and every business case is very specific, very unique. Paybacks that we've been presented with, because we quite often interrogate the assumptions and the projections to help the business case from our perspective. And some of the paybacks have been quoted at kind of 1 or 2 years, but I would typically say 4 to 7, depending on kind of all sorts of different variables. But that's typically where they sit in terms of a return on investment.
Yeah, I would back that up as well, Stuart. We tend to be thinking between 4 and 7 years, depending on the client. I think the nice thing of just to mention, Dave, that Stuart's saying is that obviously with Lombard you can do 100% worth of asset finance, so it's not that you've got to put down a 10 or 20% deposit yourself as well. I believe that's the case, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct, Tim. So we can fund 100% of the project cost. We can turn it out to 7 years and sometimes longer for things like solar and for wind. And I think the other key thing to put in there as well is our ability to kind of structure the monthly payments, so we can you can have seasonal monthly payments, and so that you're paying off more in those kind of high generating periods throughout the year. So you can get it as close as possible to kind of a cash neutral investment if you play around with the structures. Obviously, there's interest in there. We're not free, but it's as much of a cash neutral investment as you can get, to be honest with you.
Right, thank you very much, Stuart. That was a very helpful overview. We've got a few minutes left, and I think I would like to perhaps put some of the questions that have come in to the panel. And the first one I wanted to ask, maybe I could get Tim to have a look at this one, and Christelle possibly as well. And that's one that's obviously on a lot of people's minds. We've just had a change of government, and is that going to make a difference? Is there any sign, or do you think has anything been said? Was there anything in the manifesto, that sort of thing, that you think is going to make a difference? Christelle, could you address that one first?
Sure. Yeah. Look, it's early days. Okay, so there's still a lot of detail that we're waiting for, but the initial signs are promising. We believe today there's around 18.6 gigawatts of solar installed in the UK. The Labour government have set a target of 50 gigawatts by 2030. So that's a significant increase on where we are, in the region of tripling. And there's also mentions of investment and focus in particular segments. They have this week appointed somebody to lead emission control to deliver the clean power targets. So we're still waiting for some details to come. We don't know exactly yet how they're going to achieve that, but we're already seeing positive signs from them, and they've already made changes on the deployment of wind and onshore UK as well. So there's lots of positive signs there, but it is too early to really give specifics.
Tim, I'd like to ask you the same question, and also we've had a question about whether new technologies can be integrated easily into existing technologies. So perhaps you could address that as well.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, I agree with you, Christelle, exactly what you've just said, and it is too early, really. But so far, no red flags, so that's a good thing. So new technologies, yeah, I guess there's two things there, isn't there? One is you can look to upgrade your existing solar system with more efficient panels, whether that's replacing your old ones, or whether that's more likely probably expanding your system because you've now got a bit more roof space. You can still keep your feed-in tariff as long as we advise you correctly to keep the system separate. You can keep your feed-in tariff on your existing system, and we can expand the system and not affect your feed-in tariff on that. But obviously, you're getting all the energy savings. So that's the first thing. And then, yes, absolutely. In most cases, we can add an AC coupled battery storage system to your current solar system in order to increase your on-site consumption of the power that you generate, not only from your old system or any expansion of solar, but also, as we were talking about with both Matt and Richard, taking advantage of those off-peak charging rates and time of day charge discharge functionality. So yes is the answer.
Stuart, I've got a question for you that has come in on the Q&A from Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan, for this question. And he's asking, will rising interest rates reduce demand, do you think?
I don't think they'll reduce demand in terms of solar projects, on-site solar projects being built out. It might well dampen kind of interest in maybe the funding of them. However, there are ways and means that you can offset those rising interest rates. I mean, our margin, for example, in these types of transactions has remained the same, if not declined. The only thing that's changed is bank base rate. So obviously, bank base rate's increased. However, you can obviously get a better return for things like deposits if you're speaking to your bank manager. So there are ways and means of offsetting those increases in bank base rate, and at the same time funding a project through an asset finance product like you would have done 2 or 3 years ago. I think the main thing is to look at kind of the long-term gains. So the interest element is only there for 4 or 5 years, 6 years thereafter. These assets are on the roof for 20. And obviously generating free energy for your business and mitigating all sorts of risks that we've already alluded to.
I think the reality is that all it really means is that you might push your payback period by 6 to 12 months. But when you're talking about a 25-year, 30-year lifespan of these products, that's almost irrelevant.
Yeah, so it's just you got to get it in perspective, I suppose. That's the key.
Yeah.
Tim, there's an interesting question here. Does battery storage allow you to go off grid and become completely self-sufficient?
Right. Matt, that might be one better for you. I mean, I think the answer is theoretically, but the reality is that 95% or 99% of cases, no. And the reality is, certainly if you were doing it with a solar project, solar generates significantly more in the summer months than the winter months. So if you were off grid without the ability to be able to charge that battery at an off-peak time, you are very unlikely to have sufficient power in the winter months. But if you combined it with a small wind turbine and a small hydro plant and something else, then maybe you could. But the reality is, unless you're running a small farm in the middle of Wales, you're not going to.
Now, Matthew, can I get your view on that?
I concur with Tim. Yeah. So if you've already got a grid connection, there's not really. It doesn't make sense because the scale of which you'd have to build out a PV plant, associated wind or other renewable resources, or even a backup generator really to cover loads in winter potentially as well. So if you've already got a grid connection, it doesn't make sense, frankly. And whoever's asked that question should look to try to minimise grid imports if they've already got a grid connection. That should be the target.
Okay.
That's right. The grid is a giant store, really. That's how you should think of it.
Yeah. Okay. Richard, I have a question for you, I had a question for you. It's now disappeared off my screen. But it was, yes, here it is, from Greg in Bristol. How would optimization, which I assume they're referring to that sort of technology that you were talking about, how would that work in a residential setting, perhaps in social housing, that sort of thing?
So, well, thanks for the question, Dave. And Greg. We do deal with residential settings primarily in South Africa, because we use our technology there to prep for what they call load shedding. So that's grid outages. And in that case, we're looking forward to seeing when they're going to be knocked off grid and making sure that their storage is optimized, is in the right state. And then when they're off grid, reprioritizing how loads are used. So, for example, a heating load might become very important and some other loads less important when you're off grid. Here in the UK, it's very similar, except that you do have grid resilience, you are connected, but what you're looking to do is you're looking to within acceptable bounds, you're looking to price optimize when you use energy. You're looking to maybe help take the strain off the grid locally, which helps everybody, which is another reason to stay connected to the grid in reference to your previous question. But how does it? Yeah, look, there's lots of optimization to be done, and if you're producing your own energy, if you're consuming your own energy, you've got an optimization job to do. You've got an optimization issue that needs to be addressed. So how does it work? It's going to be around the loads. It's going to be around it's going to be how you use your energy. It's going to be around shaping your demand to best match your own generation and the cheapest energy that you can get your hands on, which is always renewable when you're importing.
And do you think people are generally aware? Consumers, as in non-businesses, are aware of this sort of technology?
No, I don't think they are. I think there's an increasing awareness of some of the big, the well-advertised schemes. There was one, it's called DFS. I don't know if people know it by that name, but Octopus Energy and OVO had done a lot of advertising around that. There was a scheme run by National Grid where there was a big headline price, which is about £3 per unit for reducing your energy usage across the winter. So people are getting a little bit more aware, and then those who are on more agile tariffs, so maybe they're charging their EVs overnight on a lower rate. So they're kind of what we would describe as kind of blunt, blunt instruments and scheduling to try and take advantage of these. Scheduling just simply isn't good enough. It's not good enough because of the variation, the fluctuation that is there. But it's a good start. It really is a good start. And being aware when you commit, and this is a very simple thing, and I will not go on too long about it, but the type of energy contract you go on to and the structure of that is critically important. It must match your needs. People get advice on energy contracts all the time, especially from third-party intermediaries. And they look at a bottom line figure maybe for a unit rate, and that is not reflective of how they use energy, when they use energy, and their capability to change that. And when I say that's impactful, it is hugely impactful in terms of 25, 50% of your energy cost impactful. It's huge.
Okay. Well, thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. And I'm afraid we've run out of time now. So thank you all for joining us on this Solarsense webinar on the latest innovations in clean energy solutions. We hope you've gained some valuable insight from our expert panel. But if you haven't managed to answer your particular question, please do get in touch with Solarsense via their website to get further information or to address specific queries. And a big thank you to our expert panel, Christelle Barnes from Solar Edge Technologies and Solar Energy UK, Stephen Barrett from Solarsense, Tim Cook from the Independent Energy Consultant, Matthew Doughty from Tesvolt, Richard Ryan from GridImp, and Stuart Graham from Lombard. I've been Dave Harris. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.